And a welcome here to Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora. Happy to be here with you, hanging out where sports meets that thing called life. We're inside the Great Lakes Honda City Studios. Great Lakes Honda City coming to you on 7140 Henry Clay Boulevard in Liverpool, New York. They are open for sales and service Monday through Saturday, and of course, all the time online at GreatLakesHondaCity.com. We're up and down the East Coast, the Midwest, the West Coast, and all around the globe on YouTube.com and Facebook.com, both /WakeUpCallDT, and of course on WakeUpCallDT.mixlr.com Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern Time. We appreciate you being here. And of course, many thanks to Amazon Music, Audible, iHeartRadio, iTunes, and Apple Podcasts, Player FM, Podbean, Podvine, Spotify, TuneIn, and YouTube. All you got to do is search Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora, or one word, Wake Up Call DT. Make sure to subscribe, download, follow us on all of these wonderful outlets, and we appreciate it as always. I am here today, picture in picture, with the better half of DT and DP. That DP is Dave Pasiak, longtime basketball head coach and analyst, who joins me here following the Giannis Antetokounmpo trade news, as well as round one of the 2026 NBA draft. So, Mr. Pasiak, how we doing?
Doing great, Dan. How about you?
Doing well. Happy to have you here. Happy to be hanging out as always. I appreciate this time of year as we've run through the entire playoffs together, including the NBA Finals. The Knicks getting their first title in 53 years and their third overall. They now have 1970, 1973, and 2026. And following that, we have the Giannis Antetokounmpo trade, and that's the first place that I want to go to. So as we look at the Giannis trade, this is how it all shook out. It's with the Milwaukee Bucks and the Miami Heat. The Miami Heat get Giannis Antetokounmpo, a Finals MVP and champion, and they also get Bobby Portis from the Bucks. The Bucks will get from the Miami Heat Tyler Hero, Kel'el Ware, as well as Jaime Jaquez Jr., and they will also bring in Kasparis Yakuchonis will come to the team. And on top of those four players, they will also have an unprotected first round pick in 2031, an unprotected first round pick in 2033. They had the number 13 pick in the draft this week. The pick will be made by the Heat since the trade can't officially be completed until July 6th, but that number 13 overall pick, a lottery pick, going to the Bucks in this trade. There will be a pick swap from the Heat to the Bucks in 2030 and a second round pick in 2033. So we're looking at 3 first round picks, one this year, one in 2031, one in 2033, a pick swap in 2030, and a second round pick as well in 2033, plus 4 players. What do you like or dislike about this trade between the two?
Well, I mean, holistically, you dislike the fact that, a guy like Giannis is moving, who, at one point we thought he was going to play his whole career, but that's more of kind of the sentimental side of things. From as far as the basketball business, Milwaukee's in a tough spot because, Giannis is a guy, peak of his career, wants to be able to contend for championships. And Milwaukee's roster is kind of at the point where, they're not really well positioned to do that. So, Milwaukee's kind of forced into a situation where you're trying to get as much of a return as you can. Giannis is coming up on free agency not that far out. So obviously you don't want to lose a talent like that for nothing. So, I think the Bucks, you rarely in sports get equal value, dollar for dollar when you trade a superstar for a bag of parts. Um, in part, the Bucks value to this, I think in the here and now, the Bucks got about as much as they were going to in a deal like this. All right.
Yeah.
Long term, I think you can't really fully grade this trade until you see how those draft picks pan out. Some of those are like 20, 30 plus from Miami. On the one hand, with the draft kind of smoothing out and not being as heavily weighted to the worst teams, the value of picks becomes flattened out a little bit. On the other hand, it's still going to be somewhat weighted towards the teams that don't make the playoffs. So, I think what Milwaukee is banking on is that when some of those picks come to fruition, Miami's kind of past its window with Giannis, and they're at the point when they're in a rebuild mode. Because several of the picks, like I say, are out in space in like 2030-ish,
Yeah.
2032. And here and now, the thing that'll be interesting to watch with the Bucks is what they decide to do with Hero. Do they make him their focal point or one of their focal points in a rebuild, or do they try to in turn flip him for more assets? On one hand, I think Hero is originally a Milwaukee guy, so it's an interesting move in that sense. But on the other hand, he's probably got some additional value on the market if they can flip him for more assets, because really the Bucks are not looking at contending for the next couple of years. So, um, that's the thing to keep an eye on. Hero's still, he's an all-star caliber guy. Um, and he's in the prime of his career, so he's a guy that's going to have some value. Um, so, could they flip him to, um, a more of a contending team? That I think is something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and I think, like you said with Tyler Hero, I mean, are they going to lock him in, and what are they going to do? I mean, if we look at the Bucks roster right now, the updated roster, which will be official around the July 6th time because it can't be made officially official until then, we have the likes of AJ Green, Gary Harris, Tyler Hero, Kasparis, as I mentioned, Jaime Jaquez Jr. We have Kyle Kuzma on the team, Torian Prince, as well as Gary Trent Jr., Miles Turner. I mean, so when you look at the guys that we already mentioned, the four players that are involved in this trade with the Miami Heat, plus having a Torian Prince, a Kevin Porter Jr., a Kyle Kuzma, a Miles Turner, a Gary Trent Jr., is there enough here for this team to be a playoff caliber team? Because keep in mind, there's the irony, Dave, that Miami was the last team in to the play-in this 25 26 NBA season. The Miami Heat were number 10 out of 10 in the East. The number 11 team was Milwaukee. So this trade was between the team that got into the play-in and the team that was just outside of it. Does Milwaukee now have enough to get inside of at least the play-in with the players that they've received, plus the Kuzmas and the Turners and so on that they already have on the roster?
Maybe just barely sneak in, depending on what some other people do. Some of the people below them are going to get better fairly rapidly. Halliburton comes back, the Pacers go from stinking to, back into relevance and being a factor in the East. Um, Washington with the draft and with, assuming they keep Davis and Young around, they're a team that could become playoff ready. Charlotte made a big move. So, I think their team's kind of going in the opposite direction a little bit. I don't think there's any expectation playoff wise or contention wise in Milwaukee right now. I think it's more like how do we rebuild, retool, and get us back into the conversation, into playoff relevance. And a lot of that's going to depend on hitting on some of those draft picks. Um, in terms of Miami, Miami's a team that like they've been kind of stuck in that play-in level. They had Jimmy Butler and then, getting the play-in, win the play-in game, get bounced in the first round sometimes. So I think Miami's a team, as long as Riley's running the show and Spoelstra's there, they're trying to make moves to make themselves a contender and a factor in the East. And certainly, I mean, you bring in a guy like Giannis, that's a huge step in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, in bringing us into that, looking at Miami's roster, Bam Adebayo is coming off of an 83-point game, one of the best performances in a single game ever by any player in the history. Of course, Wilt Chamberlain, a Laker forever, he holds the all-time record. He's the one that got to triple digits. But you look at Bam Adebayo and what he's done. You have Giannis coming in now, and then you have Gardner. I mean, I'm looking at the roster currently. Davion Mitchell, Bobby Portis comes with Giannis in the trade with Milwaukee. Norman Powell, former Raptor, and then you have Andrew Wiggins. I mean, when I look at this, and this is no disrespect to Miami, but outside of Bam and Giannis, those are two good pieces, right? but nobody, as I would say with Papa Joe, he always says this phrase, and I'll say it here: nobody blows my skirt up beyond, Giannis and Bam. So how much work does Miami have to do to show Giannis that they're bringing him here to win a championship?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they got to replace Hero. They got to find some three-point shooting and some guard play. They're like an out of balance team right now. Their strength is clearly in the front court.
Yeah.
Um, they've been a team that historically has been able to take guys on the margins and plug them into spots and kind of get them to outperform expectations to an extent. Um, Biggest thing they got to do is they got to get Giannis lined up or in line with an extension. Because if they can't extend him, then this trade becomes a disaster for Miami. If he plays out his contract and leaves. But I don't think they would have made the move until they had some sort of assurance from Giannis and his people that he would agree to an extension. So I mean that's got to be their number one priority. But beyond that, um, locking up and going out and finding some additional perimeter shooting and upgrade their guard play, I think is really going to be like the next move they're going to look to make.
Well, and you bring up a point that I was talking about yesterday when I saw the trade, or talking about within these last couple of days when I saw this trade happen, is that who is leading their backcourt? Who is their guy? I mean, we have Young, Drew Smith, we have Powell, you have Mitchell, you have Larson, Keels. I mean, none of these are household names. So how? I mean, I would say this to you, Dave. I would imagine that, Pat Riley, with all the moves that he's made and all of the big deals that he's got done after being a head coach and stepping into the front office, I would imagine that the conversation with Giannis going to Miami is, hey, we already got some irons out here and we already have some things happening. We have some plans in place. We have some moves to be made. I don't believe, and this is my opinion, and you can tell me what you think. I don't believe that Giannis would have gone to Miami without Pat Riley having kind of, here are my steps that I'm going to take, here are the people I'm going to reach out to, this is who we think we have good feelers out for, here's our backup plan. I just have that notion that Giannis doesn't come to Miami without Pat Riley already having irons in the fire and decisions that he's planning to make that he feels really good about that we don't know about yet as the world. But I think Pat Riley has to have other dominoes he already thinks is going to fall, are going to fall.
Yeah, and you mentioned Powell. I believe Powell's a free agent, so their ability to re-sign him factors into this jigsaw puzzle a little bit too. Um, but yeah, I think you're right. I think I'm sure that they sold Giannis on a vision and a plan. I'm sure Riley, between Riley and Spoelstra, that's been as solid of a front office as there is in the NBA for quite a long time. So, um, in terms of front office and head coach combination. So, like I said, I'm sure there are going to be other moves to follow
Mm-hmm.
on Miami's side, and things we're not even really thinking of or talking about at this point. And at the same time, like I said, I think the Heat historically have done a really good job of finding guys in the margins and having them and plugging them into significant roles. So, I think that's going to be part of their process moving forward as well.
Well, I'm going to ask you this question. We've seen him go to the same team twice. Could we see him do it again with another franchise? Does Pat Riley make a call to free agent LeBron James and ask him to come back to Miami to join Giannis and Bam and the crew?
I mean, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. It's not a move you hear talked about very often. And I think LeBron would have to go there on a serious discount. And it also, it doesn't resolve the backcourt issues,
Right.
right? Um, would it be intriguing to see LeBron next to Bam and Giannis? Yeah, sure, that would be fun and that would be intriguing. But LeBron is past the point in his career where he's going to be the primary ball handler for 40 minutes a night. I mean, he's still fully capable of doing that in stretches, but if they were to make a move like that, they would have to get really, really creative A, from a business standpoint, how they fill out the rest of the roster, and B, from a basketball standpoint of how do you take those three guys and fit them together and what kind of pieces can you put around them?
Yeah, and so I mean the question becomes if Bam to them is their superstar and Giannis is their superstar above that superstar. Do you think they attempt to make a big three? Do they make a move? In your opinion, be it LeBron or be it someone else, do you believe that Miami will try again as they did before with Bosch and already having Dwayne Wade and bringing in LeBron? Is this another iteration of Miami saying we got two, now we got to go find another one?
Yeah, I think a lot of that depends on how the economics of things work out, and where do they view Powell? Do they view him as the third guy, and he's in line to get paid,
Yeah.
and will he take a little bit of a little bit of a discount to stay in Miami, or will he go elsewhere for bigger dollars on a shorter deal? So, um, I think if they lose Powell, then I think you're more likely to see them. But there's not a ton of guys to take a big swing at in free agency this year. Um, so I don't know that that's the direction that they'll be able to go. But I'm sure that if a deal presents itself where they can bring in a third elite guy, or like I said, maybe they view Powell as that guy, then the trick is what do you put around him and how do you do it? You're going to have a bunch of guys playing on a minimum or near minimum or on vet exceptions and things like that.
Yeah, and I mean when we look at unrestricted free agents, because those are the ones that can make their decision. There's no club option or player option. These are strictly UFAs, unrestricted free agents. And we got guys that have spent a lot of time in the NBA. I mean, Norman Powell, believe it or not, we're looking at 11 years. And I mean, so when we look at who they could make a move on, a bunch of these guys that are unrestricted free agents are not the younger guys. We look at a Colin Sexton from Chicago, 8 years. Kevin Herter, 8 out of Detroit. Gabe Vincent, 7. Luke Kennard, 9 for the Lakers. And, Kyle Lowry, that's insane. 20. That can't even be real. And then Tim Hardaway Jr. I mean, these are just the backcourt unrestricted free agents. So if I give you the names that I've given you, the Seth Currys, I'll add him in. So, Shamet, Landry Shamet, Seth Curry, Gary Payton Jr., Russell Westbrook, who's 100 years old, Kyle Lowry, Aaron Holiday, as well as the Luke Kennards, the Kevin Herters, the Colin Sextons. Does anybody there stick out to you as an unrestricted free agent that they can just go out and get without having to deal with club option or team option or player option?
Yeah, well, I mean, guys like Herter or Shamet, like those kind of guys would fill a need that they have. The question is, can they, Kennard's another guy, like, can they go out and sign guys like that? Th those kind of guys might have to take a little discount to be willing to come to Miami to play with Giannis and kind of be part of, what they're going to have to sell those guys on being being a cog in a championship contender, and, because they might be able to command more money elsewhere than what the Heat can pay them, especially like I said, the Powell free agency and the ability to lock up Giannis on an extension. That's going to tie up a lot of money. If they extending Giannis is going to tie up a lot of money, and then if they re-sign Powell, that's going to tie up a lot of money, and they've got money tied up in Bam. So, some of those guys that you mentioned, they do fill the need. They're not the move the needle elite level free agent, but they're certainly pieces, and several of those guys would help to shore up the 3-point shooting need that the Heat have now. They traded Hero.
When you add in player option, club option, and restricted free agents, let's look at some of these names. We have Zach Levine, player option. We have James Harden, who has a player option. Fred Van Vliet, who has a player option, as well as Dort from OKC, who the club option is if OKC wants to keep him around. Some of the other names here: Bradley Beal with a player option. Kevin Porter Jr., Marcus Smart also have player options. Jose Alvarado off the champion Knicks has a player option if he wants to stay. And beyond that, I'm looking at some other names here that could have a place in this, and that would be looking at a few here if there's anybody that sticks out to me. Ron Harper Jr. has a club option. So of the RFA club option, player option guys, the guys that I named, or anybody maybe I didn't, is there someone you think could be enticed to go there? Could James Harden say, I'll make this my 100th team to go to?
Yeah, I think of the problem you run into it. A lot of those player option guys you listed off are on the back half of their careers.
Right.
So, declining a player option for a guy in the back half of his career is a little bit dangerous from a player standpoint because if they decline the option, are they going to command the same money in the open market that they would get next year for exercising the player option? Now, some guys might decline player option in the name of a longer extension and lock in some financial security for 3 years versus a 1 year option. So you may find some of those guys, but again, Harden, Beal, a lot of those guys are on the back end of their career. So, what are they going to command in the open market? Now, if they do decline the option, Miami becomes an interesting possibility, as far as fits from a basketball standpoint and whatnot. But the thing is, a lot of those guys, I think, at the end of the day, won't decline the options because they'll command less in the open market.
Well, I think what it comes down to is right the Carmelo Anthony conundrum. Do you stay in Denver and continue to build, or do you go to the New York Knicks, who have to give up half of their roster to get you, and you take the money, but never won a title? I think in the James Harden case, have you made enough money in your career to decline your player option and try and win a championship? It didn't work out in Brooklyn. It hasn't worked out in other places. So, I mean, let's take James Harden as an example. How many millions of dollars can you make? And do you want to win a championship more than add another 20 or 30 million dollars to your treasure chest?
Yeah, Harden's interesting too, and Harden's got some other things that he's dealing with now, which might lessen his value on the open market. He's got some off the court stuff, I believe, going on. But you know, Will, I don't know if he's a guy. He's a ball dominant guy,
Yeah.
and how a guy like Harden would fit with a guy like Antetokounmpo, that. I guess I'd have to see it and be convinced a little bit and Giannis has to have the ball all the time. I mean, you're not bringing him in there to not be the feature guy. And Harden, like throughout his career, has been very, very ball dominant. So, can they get the two of them playing cohesively? I don't know. It'd be an interesting thing to look at if Harden, were to go on the open market.
Giannis's two brothers are still with the Bucks. They don't cost a lot of money. Do you see him reaching out to Pat Riley and say, "Let me have the rest of my family here"?
I think one of them is a free agent this year, right? I mean, it wouldn't shock me um, if you saw them end up in Miami on veteran minimum or something like that. Probably as good a landing spot as any. Um, you know, there's not a lot of money tied up in his brothers.
Yeah. So, I mean, you look at the Antetokounmpo family, and then you look at LeBron and Bronny. How do you feel about nepotism in the NBA?
Well, I mean, it's a business, right? And so, from a business model standpoint, I think that's the decision. Like, is it worth keeping your star player happy to accommodate a family member who's a marginal NBA player who's like, I mean, those guys those guys can hang on an NBA roster, but they're not going to ever be impact players. At least it's highly unlikely that any of the family member types are going to be impact guys. So, um, that's a front office business decision. And, usually the family members are, they're getting them on the cheap on a minimum contract. So, are you better off giving your last seat to Antetokounmpo's brother or LeBron's son, to keep your star player a little happy, or you spend it, are you, or can you spend it on just another guy,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the question that these teams are going to have to answer, especially if LeBron decides to go elsewhere than the Lakers. And is that his conversation? Is wherever I go, I bring my son? And then at Antetokounmpo, is there going to be, hey, if you want to keep me happy, don't leave my family in the place I just left? And already we can argue nepotism with LeBron and Bronny because they're both on the same team, and Giannis with his brothers because all three of them were on the Bucks. So we can already say that it's living there. I want to thank all of our wonderful partners in Central and Upstate New York. Before we talk about the NBA draft, after talking about the Giannis trade, what it does for the Bucks and the Heat, I want to thank Great Lakes Honda City, over a decade of being with us here, and our exclusive studio partner. It's the only place that I've gotten my vehicles because I believe to put your money where your mouth is. I can't support anything that I truly don't believe in. I can't tell you to go somewhere I don't go. And I've only gone to Great Lakes Honda City, the former Honda City of Liverpool. The Wildcat Sports Pub, just about 9 years of working with them this August, and the exclusive home of where I bring all my West Genesee shows. I want to give a big time shout out to West Genesee Baseball, who won their first ever New York State title this season, and Kevin Krause, who is honored as the top coach here when we look amongst numerous sports. So, Krause, you deserved it. The Wildcats, happy to see them do it. And thanks to Danny Tome and everybody at the Wildcat Sports Pub. And 4th of July, so fitting. Danny Tome loves this country, loves America. You see it all through the Wildcat Sports Pub. And his birthday, also on the 4th of July, as America turns 250, he will turn 50 years old. So happy early birthday to Mr. Tome, who's been alive a fifth of the time of the United States. GG Cards and Breaks, speaking of Danny Tome, he loves his sports cards. So do I. And you can go there to GG Cards and Breaks, make a memory, and get closer to the teams and players we talk about all the time by going to 639 Delmar Place in Syracuse, New York. Mon Paz, the snack capital of the world. If you are out of town, you know that Dave coaches in Vermont. So if you're in Vermont, Florida, California, Montana, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Texas, wherever you may be, make sure that you head out to maandpazpopcorn.com, bring the snacks to your doorstep, or go to 201 7th North Street in Liverpool, New York, and make sure that your taste buds get to have that amusement park feel. I tell people all the time, if you go to Ma and Pa's brick and mortar, or if you go and see them in the community, it's like going to the New York State Fair in just one place. And again, another place where you get to feel like a big kid. Myers Creek has locations on the countryside as well as in the Syracuse Inner Harbor, and they are a wonderful place to go and relax. Their menu is very eclectic. They're not good at one thing. They're good at a lot of different things. And I would say when it comes to supporting local, they have the best fries in this community. Isaac and I will just order fries with nothing else, and that will definitely meet your fix. And the more I talk about it, the more I want to go there right now. So make sure you head out to 33 Rippleton Road in Kaz, or to 720 Van Rensselaer Street in the Syracuse Inner Harbor. The Baked Potato Express, I don't know if Dave knows this, but I have my own baked potato. It's called the Wake Up Call Breakfast Potato. And every event that the Baked Potato Express goes to, you can get bacon, egg, and cheese on top of their well-seasoned and very soft potato. And it's kind of like having a breakfast pizza, how soft the potato is, with a drizzle of maple syrup. Pizza Man is our exclusive home of our Baldwinsville Bees shows all throughout the year. We've had the opportunity to speak with numerous champions there, and we have packed the pub at Pizza Man on 50 Oswego Street in Baldwinsville, New York, as well as having Off the Rails with Al Romano. Al Romano being a champion nationally with Tony Dorsett and the Pitt Panthers hailing from Solvay. So I always love my time with him, as well as Jeff Cookie Cook and the Beeville Bills backers, as the Pizza Man Pub is a proud Bills backers bar for the Buffalo Bills. Chick-fil-A in Cicero, the first Chick-fil-A in Central New York, led by Jim Sikowski and his incredible team. You hear them in lead every Friday, and you see them every month as we tell the stories of their wonderful team members and what we call the light between us. We have one that's up right now, our most recent, which celebrates the United States of America in a way we've never done before with a military vet. So make sure you go see the story of Dave DeRegis. Skippy's Ice Cream, if you were in Central New York in the past decades here, you would hear the music and you'd get excited. They will bring their ice cream trucks to your event. So make sure nowadays Skippy's doesn't just show up in your neighborhood. You got to ask them. So go to skipthecake@gmail.com. That's skipthecake @gmail.com and have them come to your graduation party, your anniversary, celebration of life, whatever you got going on. Skippy's is ready for you. Canine Camp Dog Daycare is the place to bring your dog for daily care in East Syracuse. They are very easily found right off the highway and just off of Bridge Street as well as Erie Boulevard. Canine Camp Dog Daycare, 315-437-7110 to make an appointment for your dog. Game Point Sports Complex. I think Dave Pasiak, if he was here in Central New York all year round, this is where he would want to bring his team to practice. There is no better place than natural light, the climate-controlled 365-day of the year, perfect place to host a tournament, a practice, or a game with multiple courts. Game Point Sports Complex in East Syracuse, right by Canine Camp Dog Daycare, is my place of choice. Brian's Landing, a wonderful place to go in Jamesville for very fine dining and Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, beautiful music. Canine Campground Dog Boarding around the corner from the daycare and Game Point Sports Complex in East Syracuse. Long-term care for your dog, whether you need them to stay overnight or you're going to be gone for a week. They are the place where your dog gets their own cabin. If you have more than one dog, they can share a cabin, and they can also play with each other and get to know the dog community of Central and Upstate New York. For more information, call 315-299-4013. They also have adopted the wonderful addition of putting dogs up for adoption of all different ages and all different breeds. You can see those videos on our social media, as well as on Canine Campground Dog Boarding social media. If you're interested in adopting a dog, call 315-299-4013 to see who's available. Many thanks to Avicoli's, our exclusive home of the Liverpool athletic events that we do of many, many years, having coaches, administration, and student athletes, as well as alumni, joining me at Avicoli's. So make sure you go out and celebrate them today. They are open 7 days a week, and we always look forward to spending our Liverpool signature specials there with you. We just had one with Bryce Mills, who is a professional boxer, and he is heading to the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, New York for his upcoming fight. Gray's Craze of Clay, New York. There's no better place, whether it's a snack for you, for a couple people, a family, or if you're doing a big event, they will go and set it up for your wedding, for your team banquet, whatever you need. They got all different shapes and size charcuterie boards and boxes when it comes to premium meats, cheeses, homemade baked breads, as well as cookies, all their sweets, their fruit, and more, as well as the spreads they make in-house and all their hummus. Gray's Craze of Clay, New York is the place to go to. Chick-fil-A in DeWitt. You will not find a bigger Chick-fil-A, in my opinion. A giant brick building on the corner of Bridge Street and Erie Boulevard. They had to make a new light just to make sure the traffic could get in and out. Make sure you head over to Chick-fil-A as they are getting ready to celebrate a year on the corner of Bridge Street and Erie Boulevard. The Willow Rock Pizza Pub, where we have our exclusive CNS North Star broadcasts. We've only had, 4 broadcasts up to this point. We've made history. We've packed their entire greenhouse, and we've had a ton of fun with Willow Rock and the CNS North Stars. Mother's Cupboard is where I have my exclusive breakfast sandwich, where you can get the Q-Smack Mother 7 days a week from 6 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. And I can tell you that it is fantastic. Bacon, egg, and cheese inside of 2 pieces of French toast. And it's not me saying it because it's my sandwich. You have ordered it by the droves. There have been days where every other table had at least one Q-Smack Mother, and there has been a moment where, and maybe more than this moment, but I know definitely one, where they said every single table all day from 6 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. from open to close, Mother's Cupboard sold at least one Q-Smack Mother breakfast sandwich to every single table. So thank you for embracing my creation. I appreciate you all so much. And of course, our exclusive multimedia marketing partnership with the Binghamton University Bearcats. You'll find the Bearcats every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time with student athletes, coaches, administration, and alumni joining me right here to tell their stories. And you can find it all by going to youtube.com/WakeUpCallDT. Click subscribe, hit the notification bell, and find our Binghamton playlist. With that being said, we go back to Dave here. And I asked Dave, now that I've talked about almost 20 companies there, will you be able to remember all of that to give us our exit of today's show?
Probably not, but I also know that I can stop at any of those and they got something named after you, whether it's a baked potato or a breakfast sandwich or a pizza, or you got your tentacles all across Central New York.
Hey, listen, Dave, if you want to build your brand, you got to be different, you got to be unique, you have to be innovative, and you have to be consistent. And I want to thank these companies for giving me the opportunity to do something outside of the box and to have some fun with it. So we head into the NBA draft, and round one of the 2026 NBA draft is where we will go. And we're going to round one because round one is protected, right? In the sense of we know that you make money in the first round. There's only 2 rounds of the NBA draft. There used to be more, but now with only 2 rounds, nothing is secure in round 2. I find it weird and strange. You get drafted in round 1. If you get drafted in the lottery, then, you got some good money coming to you. If you get drafted in the first round, you got something coming to you. But if you get drafted in the second round, yeah, it's great to get drafted, but there's really little to no protection. Like or dislike the current model, Dave, should there be protection in the first and second round, or should it be what it is right now, where I get drafted in the first round, I know I got a contract, I get drafted in the second round, it still doesn't guarantee that I'm not playing in the G League. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, you can get 2-8 in the G League at the end of the first round too, but you're right, you do have the guaranteed contract that'll give you some level of security. I think we've talked about this, I think, in past years. Depending on the situation, like it is a lot of times in the player's best interest to not get drafted in the second round and go on the open market as a free agent because there are people in the second round, especially near the top of the second round, with guys that are near first round picks. Kolek with the Knicks comes to as a recent example. Like you knew he's going to make the roster and be a guy that they thought could contribute at some point. The second round picks, and we'll see how, whether this ends up being the case this year, but a lot of times teams have used the second round picks to stash European guys that they're not ready to bring over for a year or two.
Yeah.
So it's been used that way a little bit, I think. But in terms of a guy who's like looking to get into the league right now, if you're not in the first round, you're better off being a free agent most of the time versus being a second round pick, because when you're a free agent, you can pick and choose and put yourself in the best opportunity to land eventually land the contract. And I think the one thing that the second round pick does do for you is, you're automatically connected to that club. So you're probably going to play summer league with them, get some video out there. So like if there's no roster spot for you with the team that drafts you, you maybe advantage yourself a little bit as far as catching, raising some eyebrows and catching some teams' attention to sign. So, it's an interesting thing to think about. Like, I can't imagine back in the days where it was like 6 or 7 rounds in the NBA draft, and those guys getting drafted late. Late draft picks have like zero chance of sticking on a roster. So, I think that in terms of interest in the draft and in terms of what's best for the players, I think shortening the draft down to a couple rounds makes sense. And, I think you can even make an argument that the draft really should only be 1 round.
Right. And I mean, I guess what I'm getting at big picture wise is, okay, you get drafted in the second round and that team has your rights and you play in summer league and whatnot, but should there be a change where, there's guaranteed money in the second round? I mean, should it, if there's only going to be 2 rounds, because you look at other sports where, I mean, for goodness sakes, the NHL has more. The Major League Baseball feels like they got 115 rounds, and then you got the NFL with 7. Are If there's only going to be 2 in the NBA, and the NBA is the second highest moneymaker next to the NFL right now, fighting back and forth with Major League Baseball, shouldn't these 2 rounds have protection? If there's only going to be 2 and it's going to be this short of a draft, I mean, 60 picks or less, do you not think that that kind of shortness should provide some more security to guys drafted in the second round?
Yeah, I mean, there's two sides to the coin, right? Yeah, there's only two rounds in the NBA, but I mean, there's only five guys on the court at a time. The rosters are, 12 active guys, right? Versus like you look at the NFL, there's 7 rounds in the NFL draft, but there's 50 guys on the roster, and between offense, defense, special teams, specialization, there's you know 35 guys getting on the field in a typical game, 35, 40 guys. So, and in baseball and hockey are a different animal too because of the farm system. I know the NBA has the G League, and that's certainly an avenue for second round guy, free agent, whatever, and get signed now to two-way contracts. Um, I think that if they did provide some kind of protection, um, that's something that would have to be like collectively bargained through the union, and I guess I don't know where the union would fall on that. If you're going to protect the second round guy, that's going to bump out a veteran.
Right.
So that may, that may not be something that the union folks would ever sign on to. If you protected them, I think it would have to be done in such a way that they'd be guaranteed a two-way contract because I don't think you could. Um, I don't think you could or would, or what you would see is you'd see even more instances of guys not signing. And guys, second round guys, teams just stashing them overseas or whatever.
So, I mean, I guess if we protected the second round with guaranteed money like the first round, we would also have to look in the collective bargaining agreement of expanding the NBA roster. Maybe you can't have one without the other.
That could be, yeah. And it'll be interesting because the NBA is talking expansion now. So, they're talking about potentially Seattle and Vegas are the two cities you hear coming up the most. And Silver was on a pre-draft last night talking about it a little bit, and he said it would probably be 27, 28, or 28, 29 when you see if they're going to expand, that would be when it is. So if you expand, now you've got like another 30 roster spots. So, maybe at that point it makes sense to reevaluate whether to protect second round picks because you could do what you suggested, add a roster spot. And just by the nature of expansion, if you bring two new teams in the league, that's, another 30 roster spots plus anybody that's on IR or whatever. So that, that might be something they could take a look at when they expand.
Yeah, and I'm looking at this right now, and the reality, and you bring it up, and I love that you brought it up because I do want to talk about this, and my intent was to talk about this deeper, and what better person than my NBA guy, which is you. I mean, looking at Vegas and Seattle, two viable places for there to be expansion here. Seattle had a franchise in the SuperSonics, and to me, one of my favorite logos of all time. And then, Vegas, look at what Vegas has done. Vegas has had an NHL team. They expanded there with the Las Vegas Golden Knights. Their first year of expansion, which is almost unheard of across any sport in America, they made it to the postseason, let alone make it far in the postseason. They've already won a Stanley Cup in less than a decade of existence. Then you look at the Las Vegas Aces for the WNBA, who have won 3 titles in them being a franchise there. We look at the fact that the Raiders are back in Vegas, and then we look at, in Vegas now, and we after being in kind of This is their third location. So now with the Raiders being there in Allegiant Stadium, we also know that stadium is going to be hosting the College Football Playoff National Championship for the 2026-27 season in late January, on January 25th, I believe. And then we have the athletics that are supposed to be moving to Vegas. So, I mean, really, the NBA is like late to the party at this point. Here's something that's unique, Dave. Is there any other city in America that had a WNBA team before an NBA team? I don't think there is.
Then well, Mohegan, Connecticut.
Yeah, I mean, and then as soon as I said it to you, I was like Connecticut Sun. But so yeah, I mean, besides, it's funny that you like knee jerk because as soon as I passed the mic back to you, I was like Connecticut. So, but yeah, I mean, I think besides that, it's just Vegas, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's really interesting to see how, um, I guess, the attitude of professional sports towards Vegas has changed. Because, I mean, if you go back in history, it would have been taboo to talk about putting a team in Vegas because of the gambling and, the casinos. And I mean, like UNLV in their heyday, you couldn't bet on UNLV games because they were in state. Um, and I think the NBA kind of started that trend to an extent because, um, they've taken Summer League to Vegas has become an event, and they've kind of gotten their feet into the city pretty heavily in that respect. But like, you're right. Hockey went there first and football and baseball and it's only natural for the NBA to try to expand into Vegas. And Vegas is an interesting market because it's not, the population of Vegas itself, I don't think is that large compared to, um, most other major league professional sports cities, but Vegas has got the transient, tourism, gambling traffic
Yeah.
in and out. So uh, I think it's going to be, the hockey team has done really well. And, when they first came into existence, their pregame introductions was like the greatest thing in sports. But,
Yeah.
um, so the Anna Clarkson guys got like a team called Golden Knights. But, um, I think starting with the NHL team, I think they've proven that Vegas can support a professional sports franchise because I think that, in addition to the gambling, I think the kind of transient nature of people in Vegas, um, versus people that put down their roots in most other major cities. I think that was another thing that was scaring off, professional teams for a long time. But the attitude around that has flipped 180 to where Vegas is really a desirable market for major league professional sports now.
So here's the question. If the NHL didn't believe that Vegas could sustain a team, does any of this happen? Like, if not for the Vegas Golden Knights, is Vegas still a vacated place when it comes to professional sports?
I mean that certainly was a huge step. I think that the attitudes around gambling have changed enough, and the money in Vegas, and it's interesting the NBA being like the party of the major professional sports. When the NBA was kind of the first major professional sports league to kind of come out and say we acknowledge that gambling is a thing, and instead of pretending it doesn't exist, how do we leverage that and how do we keep that under control and whatnot. But I think like, the Golden Knights going there and being very successful there, I think has certainly, um, alleviated some of the fears of the other major leagues about, whether the local people and the local economy in Vegas would support a major league team at the same level they do in other cities. So, and that I think we'd still get there, but the Golden Knights certainly accelerated that process for, the NFL, Major League Baseball, and the NBA.
Yeah, and I think this is going to be interesting. It's definitely going to be interesting to see because the question was could Vegas sustain this, and they've obviously proven that they can. So now it becomes where do we go from here? Is this because I do think, I mean, ultimately, Dave, I think that we're going to see an NBA team in Las Vegas because let's be real. If all these other franchises have gone there, including franchises that, like the Athletics, who haven't been good for a really long time, if those franchises are going to find a home in Vegas, then you would imagine that they're going to want to put an NBA team there. And I wouldn't think that, the NBA is going to miss the boat. And like you said, I mean, at this point, they're late to the party essentially. So we'll see what they do here, and we'll also, see how people feel about it. But when we talk about Vegas, it makes sense, because of everything that we've spoken about. And like you said, I mean, the question was going to be, if Vegas isn't really home to many, then if it is this, transient group and it's just kind of people going in and out, it's an amusement park essentially. And so it's an amusement park for adults. Now that you add in all these professional teams, you bring in the family, you bring in the kids. So maybe that's another approach. But we look at this desert in the middle of nowhere place that is now just expanding. I mean, people talk about Orlando being the amusement capital of the United States of America, but now with Vegas having everything they already had, now they have the stuff that is beyond gambling. But if you are a gambler, you can still go there. So it's like, because gambling's been utilized more and more and the doors open collegiately and professionally, it only helps a place like Vegas to have professional teams there as you've expanded gambling and your openness to it. And it was taboo and now not so much. So that only helps them for who they already were. But I also think that bringing in teams helps them for what they weren't. So it's like it expands who you are, but then it expands your portfolio into who you've never been.
Yeah, for sure. It's more it's more of an entertainment destination than a gambling destination. And I mean, Vegas has always had like the shows attached and everything, but those were tied back into the gambling. So, I think the attitude around the other thing that, um, I think especially in the NBA with the salaries the way they are, I think now it's easier for leagues to expand into Vegas and have less concern about the gambling element because the salaries are such that, um, nobody in the NBA is going to risk a multi-million-dollar salary over, trying to shave points in a random game, you know.
Yeah.
So, whereas maybe if you go back in league history where, in any sport where people weren't making that kind of money, that's what gets you the Black Sox scandal in baseball and the Boston College thing in college basketball and Donaghy with fixing the games in the NBA. So, I think the money directly in the sport is such that that's, I think, more of a deterrent now, or the risk of that, I think, is more of a deterrent now than it's ever been.
Yeah. So, I mean, we look at Vegas, like we said, becoming what they've never been. Seattle, the opposite. We're trying to have them become what they once were. Seattle had a franchise in the SuperSonics. They lost them to the Oklahoma City Thunder. They drafted Kevin Durant. They saw him leave to Oklahoma City. When that franchise went from Seattle to Oklahoma City, they were the worst franchise in the NBA in the entire nation at the time, record-wise. Seattle then would gain a WNBA franchise. They would gain an MLS franchise, which begged the question, if we already have the Mariners in Major League Baseball, and we have a WNBA team, and we have, the NFL team in the Seattle Seahawks who just won a title, and on top of that, we now have the Seattle Kraken in the expansion of the NHL. Look at the city of Seattle, Washington. You have the WNBA, the MLB, the NHL, you have the NFL, you have the MLS. So again, you had it, but in its own way, it looks like the NBA is late to the party. I never thought there would be a world where the Seattle SuperSonics would fail to exist. Do you think that Seattle, since the moment of losing the SuperSonics, has always kind of been a place? I mean, we've seen moments in history, Dave, where people have packed areas, kind of in the not so quiet petition of wanting their team back. Charlotte lost their franchise because it seemed like, the franchise wasn't making enough money. There wasn't enough people going. The moment they lost the franchise, they wanted a franchise back. They lost the Hornets to New Orleans and they got the Bobcats, and now they're the Hornets again. Is Seattle in the same boat? It's just taken a lot longer than it did with Charlotte, but is Seattle in the boat of the moment they lost the Sonics, we kind of always knew they'd find their way back?
Yeah, I think the Seattle situation, like I liken it more to like the football situations with um with the Cleveland Browns or with the Colts in Baltimore, to where almost from the moment they left, the league was determined, the team and the franchise leaves because they're not getting what they want out of the locals, out of local government, in terms of arenas and things like that. And as soon as they leave, the league is like, we need to get a team back there. And I think that's been the sentiment with Seattle for quite a while in the NBA that, when they decide they're ready to expand, I think it's been a given that we're going to put another team back in Seattle. And my guess is, I'd have to go back and check on this, but I think that like the history of the franchise remains in Seattle. So I think when they do put a team back in Seattle, I'm pretty sure it's going to be the SuperSonics, and it'll be a situation like the Cleveland Browns where they retain the history of the franchise when the new team comes in. Um, I don't think it'll be. I think it'll be more of that and less of like the Colts, where the Colts' whole identity went to Baltimore, and then the Ravens came in as a totally new franchise. So I think there's recognition of the history in Seattle and everything.
Right before the 21st century hit in the late 90s, the Supersonics were a viable team to go after a championship with Hersey Hawkins, as well as Sam Perkins, Detlef Schrempf, Gary Payton, Sean Kemp and company. It's been almost 2 decades without them. Do you feel that loss? Do you think the NBA, do you think that that was a misstep? Do you think it was something that was almost a detriment? Knowing, yes, the Sonics relogoed themselves, rebranded themselves, and weren't the same team post Gary Payton and Sean Kemp, but knowing how good they were, are you in a world where you think the last almost 20 years of the NBA kind of disserviced themselves not having Seattle?
Yeah, I mean, I think the original move, like we said, it was I think they got to a stalemate with the local government about an arena, and then Clay Bennett bought the franchise, and from the time he bought the franchise, he was looking for a way to move it to Oklahoma City. So, so I think it certainly hurt the people in Seattle, like the Sonic fans and everything. And I think there's the Sonics. I mean, they've got NBA championship in their in their history and everything. So I think not having the Sonics, like there's a little bit of a historical void there in the NBA, and I think that, like I said, I think there's been a conscious recognition of that, and the league looking for an opportunity to put a team back in Seattle. You haven't heard. It's a little bit different. Like in the NFL, you hear about like teams getting. I mean, the Buffalo Bills, they don't get a stadium, and they're going to move the franchise. And you hear of communities holding up, um, or teams holding up communities for perks and stadium deals and what like that, under threat of moving the franchise. We haven't really heard that in the NBA. I think it's been a kind of a mindset that, sooner or later, they weren't looking to snatch somebody else's franchise, but when the league decided it was going to expand, Seattle was going to be the first market they were going to go back into.
Yeah. And in my lifetime, I would like to see the return of Seattle more than anything when it comes to the NBA, if we're going to bring a city in. I do want to make a note of what was said recently by the commissioner that you alluded to, Commissioner Adam Silver of the NBA. We're looking at his words from the Dan Patrick Show that Seattle and Las Vegas remain the cities the NBA is focused on if it expands. He said, quote, if we expand, at least we're thinking 28-29 season, end quote. Silver previously signaled before the March meeting this year, March 2026, that Seattle and Las Vegas were at the center of the expansion discussion, while cautioning no decision's been made. He did say in February, quote, we will make decisions in 2026, end quote. At the time, Silver said the league was not expected to vote in March, but could emerge from those meetings ready to take the next step. We know that they have taken the next step because they have approved that they will move forward. We know that the NBA owners are okay with the continued conversation and the approval to look at the expansion in Seattle as well as Las Vegas. So now that we know that this was a conversation, it was a thought, but now it is more of a reality when it comes to voting. In your opinion, Dave, do you feel like, I mean, obviously you got to make bids, you got to find an arena or build an arena, you got to be prepared for what's coming. But do you think the NBA's overall response, ownership wise, of their 30 franchises, that we are in a very clear path from going to 30 to 32?
Yeah, it seems like it. I think, I mean, there's some hurdles to still, to still conquer. And and one thing Seattle doesn't have to worry about is they do have an NBA ready arena. They've got the arena that the hockey team plays in now. So that was the big issue when the team left in the first place was, the arena was really not up to NBA standards anymore. So that piece is conquered, and that's a huge piece. So, one of the things that the league will have to figure out, let's say they go to Seattle and New Orleans or Seattle and Las Vegas, somebody in the West is going to need to move to the East. And there's not a real clean path to how to accomplish that. Um, you know, there's to, there's some options on the table that they discussed about who would slide over and geographically, because the NBA has stayed pretty true to geographics for the most part. When it comes to divisions, which don't mean a lot anymore, and when it comes to East versus West. So, I mean, that would want to be one of the things. I think now with their, the new media agreement that kicked in this year and everything, there's plenty of money to go around. So, I think from a business standpoint, it seems like everything is kind of falling into place for expansion to happen.
Well, I'll tell you this. Seattle and Vegas, if they both get put in the West, we know it's even right now with 30 franchises, 15 in the East, 15 in the West. If we add 2 to the West to get to 17, if we add 2 to the West, then we're going to have to move, right? So if the West has their 15 and we add 2, then where are we going to put these other teams in order to even it out? And so I'll tell you this right now, Dave, in my opinion, if you say they stay pretty good with geography as opposed to collegiate athletics, the franchises I could see move from the Western Conference to the Eastern Conference to create balance. I could see Memphis in Tennessee. I could see Denver in Colorado. And ironically, I could see Oklahoma City, who are the former Seattle SuperSonics, the Oklahoma City Thunder. I mean, if we look in the Midwest, we could also talk about the Minnesota Timberwolves. I think feet to the fire, I would look in New Orleans. I think if it was up to me today and I didn't go to Texas and I thought, like, what's the closest I could get, I would say the Memphis Grizzlies, the Minnesota Timberwolves, the New Orleans Pelicans would probably be the teams I would look at to fill the void to move to the East if we're going to add 2 to the West.
Yeah, I think if you believe the chatter, I think Minnesota's probably the most likely candidate because they kind of fit into that geographic space with Chicago and Detroit and Milwaukee, the upper Midwest teams, and they're a little bit separated from the rest of the West, anyways. I mean, I don't see Denver moving. I think he could move Memphis or New Orleans, but the one you hear the most often is Minnesota, and the one that probably makes the most sense when you kind of look at the NBA map is Minnesota.
Yeah, so I think Minnesota Memphis would be the least surprising to me. Minnesota New Orleans could also make some sense as well. I do want to get into, we promised you the NBA draft here. I want to make a note of the pick though, Dave, when we talk about protected versus unprotected, just to help people understand the Giannis trade as well, to kind of tie what we started talking about to what we will end the show with today, the marrying of the NBA draft, a protected pick versus an unprotected pick. Now, protected NBA draft picks come with conditions, or limitations. The conditions are to safeguard the pick from being transferred to another team under specific circumstances. As an example, a protected draft pick might be safeguarded against dropping below a certain draft position or safeguarded against outright loss. An unprotected pick, when we look at those, they're devoid of any condition or restriction. Those picks can be traded freely without any encumbrances, giving the receiving team full control and ownership over the draft selection. Unprotected picks are straightforward assets that can be utilized in trade or selection without any additional consideration. So, when we look at the Giannis trade and we speak about unprotected picks, there is life to the fact that this two-team deal between Milwaukee and Miami could end up on July 6th having more teams involved if the Milwaukee Bucks choose to add in other teams and move some picks around.
Sure, and I think with the new rules for the draft lottery, they put in some restrictions on picks that can no longer be protected. And I think that because it's kind of flattened out the lottery, like a lot of the protection thing is based on forecasting. Is this team going to be better a year, 2 years, or 3 years down the road, or is it going to be worse? Is that pick more, is a pick in the top five today going to still be a top five pick, or will that team likely be a contender? If I have a top five protected pick, so, I'm thinking that pick's going to be like my Sixers they lost the pick this year because they finished out of the top five. If they would have finished top five, the pick they got in the trade that would have ended up in the top five, they would have kept the pick this year. So I think one of the things that'll be interesting to see going forward is I think a lot of these picks that have been traded out into the future, um, the value calculus on those picks changes with the new draft rules. So, the other thing is like you can't be under the new rules, you can't be at the top of the lottery like, back to back years. So I think some of the calculus that went into how to protect the pick, when to protect the pick, I think all of that is going to change with the new draft rules. And I think the teams that do the best job of figuring that math out will probably, they're going to be the ones that stand to benefit.
Yeah, and like you said, with new rules comes who is going to be able to really use all these to their advantage, understanding where it's coming. Milwaukee's got the capital now to maybe go and get some players, right? Maybe they go to another team and say, "Hey, you got some guys we want right now that maybe you're not 100% sold on. We'll give you some picks. We'll take some of these guys and maybe they start to build their roster with actual NBA players as opposed to future picks that right now are void of name or talent at the current position that they're in. Let's look at round one of this 2026 NBA draft. AJ Debinsa gets chosen from BYU forward, number one overall by the Wizards. You and I spoke about what the Wizards were doing during this season, the moves that they made to bring in very talented players, to have youth, to have veteran status, and to be building toward a bid to get into the NBA postseason, hopefully in this 2026-27 season. Then in the lottery, they ended up with the number one pick. Like or dislike AJ Debinsa, do you think they should have gone elsewhere? Or do you think this is yet another move with a team that is creeping forward in the East, that is the Washington Wizards?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it turned out to be the chalk pick because for all the talk about how it could be Demansah or Peterson or Boozer, and how there was uncertainty at the top of the draft, there really wasn't uncertainty at the top of the draft. Like he's been talked about as the likely number one pick pretty much since last year's draft ended. And other guys got themselves into that conversation to one degree or another. But it's the kind of thing where if the Wizards passed on him, and let's say they take Peterson or they take Boozer, um, you could be hero if that guy ends up being an all-star caliber player, generational player. But if that guy flames out, which his history shows, like the draft for all the hype and everything, it's still largely a crapshoot. So you don't get fired picking Debinsa because he was kind of the consensus guy all along. If you pick Peterson, you pick Boozer at the top of the draft, and they don't pan out to the degree that you hope, then you get fired. So I think there's a lot of that in, I've seen it for years in college sports recruiting. as soon as one school at a level or in a conference recruits a guy, then everybody's going to recruit him. And I think you see it in the NBA too, like in the NFL, right? Um, the draft is to a certain extent, it's overhyped because if you look back and you'll see, for every guy like, Wemby or Cade Cunningham, it's an all NBA guy. You got a guy like Brunson, who's a second round pick that's, MVP of the playoffs, or you get a guy like Jokic, who's a second round pick that is an MVP caliber player. Um, there's a little bit of crapshoot involved, but if you make the move that everybody else is thinks you should make and whatnot, in a consensus move, it's a little bit of protection for yourself. Like if you're the guy if the Wizards are the guy that passes on to Devontae and he ends up being a first team All NBA caliber player, the the fan base and the media will never let them forget that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, and when you look at their roster right now, I feel really good about Washington, at least on paper. You look at the fact that they draft number one overall AJ Debinsa if he pans out from BYU. They already made the move to bring in Trey Young and D'Angelo Russell. So you look at both of these guys under contract. You look at Anthony Davis under contract. And then you look at a guy like Bob Carrington, Anthony Gill as well on this team, and Alex Sarr. I mean, you got a bunch of these guys that you've made moves for, and Debinska joining an Anthony Davis, Trey Young, D'Angelo Russell squad. Dare I say it? I mean, I think we could arguably see this Wizards team, if they stay healthy and do what they need to do, be a top 4 or 5 team in the East. I mean, this could be one of the smartest teams from last year into this draft, making decisions in less than a calendar year to go from obscure team to a team that's really going to be an impactful team in the postseason.
Yeah, I think when they made the moves for Young and Davis and everything, I think that was their thought process. They're like, we're looking at another high draft. They brought those guys in, but they shelved them. So they were looking for a high draft pick, which they got the number one pick. So, I think they're a team, and they've already been accumulating some talented young guys. You mentioned a lot of them. So I think they're a team that uh, thought that by when you combine the high draft pick this year, you bring in Young, they just extended Trey Young.
Yeah.
There's been talk about them trying to move Davis for other parts. I don't think that's going to happen at the end of the day, but that remains to be seen. But I think the one thing that I'd be concerned about on the Wizards side is that you've got a guy like Young who's been shown that he has the ability to carry a team for a stretch, but he's also shown the ability to really damage a team from inside at times. And the same can be said a little bit for Davis. I mean, Davis has had stretches where people have talked about him as being, maybe the best player in the NBA. But, through a lot of his career, he's also been a guy where his teams have come up a little bit short. And, except for the year they won a championship with LeBron and the Lakers and everything. So I think if everything comes together nicely in Washington, I think you could see them. I don't know, within the next, whether it's next year or the year after, as this core they've put together, combined with Young and Davis, as they kind of figure things out and start to gel, they could emerge as one of the better teams in the East, I think, fairly short order. They kind of remind me of like where the Spurs were at.
Yeah.
Or where OKC was at a few years back, or the Houston Rockets, where they're like a bottom feeder team, brought in some young talent, pushed a couple of buttons, and went from bottom of the barrel to relevancy pretty quickly.
Yeah. And I mean, I do. If I was going to put my money on something, I'd put it on in the NBA. I'd put it on Washington right now. I see you, Washington. I've been paying attention. And then you got the number one pick. Darren Peterson from Kansas is a number 2 overall pick. He joins a team, Dave, that has, some names that I'm looking at right now. I'm looking at, the Kyle Filipowski as well as, Isaiah Collier. We're looking at Ace Bailey on this squad, Jaren Jackson Jr., Kevin Love. Does Utah give you any feel or sense that Darren Peterson went to a team that can make the postseason?
Well, it's interesting. Utah's another team that I think has accumulated some good young players, but it feels like nobody wants to go to Utah. Like Bailey was trying to talk his way out of Utah last year, and I think Peterson, I might be mistaken on this. I think he refused to work out for Utah. So, they're a team that's held a high draft pick for a couple of years running, and guys haven't been super excited to go there. So, um, I think they're accumulating parts for sure. Um, whether it all fits together and whether they can keep those guys, um, beyond their first contract and mature them um, into solid NBA players. I think that remains to be seen a little bit.
Yeah, I think 100%. We'll see. But I do agree with you. It seems like people don't want to go to Utah. Cam Boozer, guy I've interviewed and been around, and also got to spend some time around his dad, Carlos Boozer, successful in college as well as in the NBA. Cam Boozer at Duke, his brother is staying at Duke right now, but he becomes the third overall pick. And Cam Boozer, a forward, goes to the Memphis Grizzlies. Let's take a look at Cam Boozer and this Memphis Grizzlies team and what it looks like with the updated roster for them. They have, Cam coming in, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, who I mentioned before. I liked him before. Maybe arguably people knew about the guy. They have Walter Clayton Jr. They have Zach Edey from Purdue, who I also covered in college. They have Taylor Hendricks, Taj Gibson, as well as Ty Jerome. All of these that I'm mentioning under contract. Ja Morant, who hopefully will not continue to be a problem. Scottie Pippen Jr. What does Memphis do for you? There's been a lot of different iterations of Memphis, and there's been a lot of moments where we think that Memphis could maybe be something special. The Pau Gasol days. What do you think about Memphis right now? And can Cam Boozer lift this team into a place where they can actually be a tough out in the NBA playoffs?
Well, it's interesting because you've got like kind of one of the most mercurial guys in the league in Morant, who, um, at various times, I mean, it's a couple of years ago where Memphis was as good as anybody in the West. And, Morant has had his share of issues somewhat on the court and somewhat off the court. And, the franchise is kind of hitched to him to a certain extent. And now you draft Boozer, who I think probably, how do I put this? He's probably the safest pick amongst the top guys, in the draft. Is that, his floor is pretty high. You know what you're going to get. His ceiling might not be as high as a guy like Abanza or, or Peterson and whatnot, but his floor is higher than those guys. That like the likelihood of him being a bust in my opinion, is pretty slim. So, I think he's a guy that seems to fit with what they want to do. They can, um, plug him in next to Zach Edey and whatnot. Um, so, like, I think a good stabilizing pick, I would call him for, for a team like Memphis. I think the thing Memphis has to figure out is like, can you continue to hit your cart to John Morant with all that comes with him?
Yeah, that becomes the big question is if he continues to be a problem and they can't move him, then are you just sitting with a locker room virus at all times? The fourth overall pick also comes from the state of North Carolina and the ACC. Caleb Wilson, a forward going to the Chicago Bulls from the North Carolina Tar Heels. He did not play a full season this past season. He only played one season in college as a true freshman for North Carolina. He did get injured and he was out for a time, but he finishes with 24 games played. He started in every single one of them. And when you look at the grand scheme of things, he had an average of 19.8 points per game, 1.5 steals, 1.4 blocks. His total rebounds is 9.4 and assists were 2.7. How do you feel about Caleb Wilson? Is this a good move or are you a little leery of maybe not seeing enough of him?
Well, we didn't see a lot, and so it comes back around to like the crapshoot thing. Um, if he can stay on the floor, I think you saw enough of him to see that, that there's high upside potential there with him. Um, the Bulls are in kind of a weird spot right now that, um, they've got a lot of cap space to work with, and they were kind of stuck in that, like, not rock bottom, but not good enough to contend mode. Um, so I think like a guy like Wilson, if he can stay healthy, um, this is kind of where everybody figured he would land, because they kind of, most of the pundits had him below the top three guys, but above everybody else. So, um, they've got some good young parts. I think, Giddey's a good player. Gonzalez, White, they've got some guys that, to build around. And I really like their splitter hire, bringing him in as the new head coach after Donovan kind of burned out. I think when it's all said and done, I think Portland's going to rue the day that they didn't retain Splitter long term, because I thought he did a really good job with the Blazers, and I think he's has a potential to be the right guy to um, head up a rebuild in Chicago. So, I think there's light at the end of the day for them for sure.
Yeah, and then we look at, pick five of these top five, Keaton Wagler, who comes over. The pick came from the Pacers. It goes to the Clippers. The guard out of Illinois finds his way to the Los Angeles Clippers, who have a new logo. Nicholas Batum, pardon me, as well as, Bradley Beal. We talked about him having the opportunity that if he wants to, he has some wiggle room here if he wants to remain with the Clippers. And then Bogdanovich, the same. He has some wiggle room this season. Chris Dunn, and then we look at Derrick Jones Jr., of course, Kawhi Leonard, Brooke Lopez, and so on and so forth. What are your thoughts with Wagler going to the Clippers? Good move for them. I mean, they got some free agent, they have potential guys that can move around here. It's not set in stone who's going to stay a Clipper, and Kawhi's got to stay healthy. So, do you think this Clipper project is done? Do you look at Wagler and say, you've now gone to a team that's on the precipice of a rebuild? How do you look at it?
Yeah, I mean, he seems to be a good fit. I think he's a good fit next to Garland. And, one of the things keeping on with the Clippers, you hear rumblings every now and then about, are they going to try to move Leonard for parts? You know,
Uh-huh.
which would signal like more of a full-blown rebuild. Assuming that they continue to be built around Leonard and Garland and whatnot, and Leonard's in the last year of his contract, so um, I don't know where that's going to leave them. But assuming that he remains part of the plan and whatnot, um, and they can re-sign him and everything. I, I think Wagler's a good pick for the here and now for the Clippers. I think how he plays out long term is really tied to what their long term direction for the franchise is.
Yeah, we'll see what that looks like. We know the Clippers tried to make a big two, big three at times, didn't work out. The sixth overall picks to the Brooklyn Nets. We look at Michael Brown Jr. from Louisville, yet another ACC player. He is a guard who goes to the Brooklyn Nets. We've speaking about somebody trying to make a big three and it didn't work out. Brooklyn definitely historically tried to do it a couple times here after moving from New Jersey to Brooklyn and playing in the Barclays Center. The Nets have attempted to have the iterations of big threes and they did not pan out. So now we look at Brown going to a team that has a lot of guys that don't necessarily have to stay there moving forward, where there's a lot of names on their current roster that could move. We know that Terrence Mann is under contract. Michael Porter Jr. does have the opportunity to hang around. Julius Randle as well, as we look at some movement. So do you see anything from Brooklyn, or is this a team where you say to Brown, hey, get ready to get a little bit comfortable being uncomfortable as they try to figure it out?
Yeah, I think one of the things they got to do is, remember, they had 5 first-round picks last year. So they got to figure out which of those guys they project as really being legitimate NBA caliber starters and which ones not. They've already got a bunch of cap space. They're a team that probably won't be very good this year.
Yeah.
The incentive to tank is not what it was in the NBA. So, I mean, there's more incentive to get better quicker. So, that being the case, I can see them being a team that they're not good enough to contend. They may be a team that you see during the year. Um, they've already got a lot of cap space, and then they could um, kind of take on some expiring contracts for some additional, free up some additional cap space a year from now,
Yeah.
and some draft picks going forward. I think that's the direction they're going to go. But their immediate thing is to figure out like which of those guys that they drafted last year and then, along with Brown this year, like who do they see as being legitimate foundation pieces that they can build around?
Yeah. I think Brooklyn's got a lot of questions they got to answer. They got a young team, as you made mention of where they're going to go. The seventh overall pick to the Sacramento Kings, Darius Acuff Jr., a guard out of Arkansas. Let's look at Sacramento here as Acuff heads there. This is a name that you hear about. It's one of the names that I had to figure out, I think, when I was voting for potential player of the year collegiately. So you have Precious on this team, who is currently under contract. You have Devin Carter, DeMar DeRozan in Sacramento, former Toronto Raptor. We have Drew Eubanks as well as DeAndre Hunter, Doug McDermott, Zach LaVine, who could change. That's not a name that may stay there. And we have Domantas Sabonis as well as Russell Westbrook, who could move once again, as he's been a little bit of a journeyman after Oklahoma City. So, thoughts on Sacramento bringing in Acuff, and does this signal the end of a Russell Westbrook run, or what does this do to Sacramento?
I love the A cup pick. Like I think, he's a guy that's gonna, I mean, he's gonna take on a big role for them. Um, if he stays healthy, I mean, he's a guy that I think is going to be in the rookie of the year conversation next year just because of the role that he has and he can score and he's going to score for Sacramento. I mean, they're going to give him every opportunity. Um, you know, I think they're a team that's going to try to make some moves, like with some of their older guys, Levine, Sabonis, that kind of thing, to kind of retool the team younger a little bit. And I think there'll be a market for those guys. I think there's a market for Sabonis and a market for Levine and everything. So, how the Kings play that out will be interesting to see. But in terms of the draft pick, I thought, this is a guy that was, that fits what they needed. They didn't have to make a move to get him. I think that, the Kings to me were again, it's all what ifs, and there's a lot of speculation involved in it, and a lot of unknown with the draft. But on paper, I think this is a great pick for them.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I feel, of all the names we talked about in the top 10 here, I feel really good about Darius Acuff Jr. So I would agree with you. I think Sacramento got themselves a potential superstar for a long time in the face of their franchise. Kingston Flemings goes to the Atlanta Hawks. He's from Houston. He's a guard there. I've covered Houston for many years. Respect the work of Kelvin Sampson. This pick came from the Pelicans, the eighth overall pick. And that brings the situation for Flemings. He goes on to a team that now under contract has Dyson Daniels, as well as Buddy Hield, Jalen Johnson, Corey Kispert, as well as Jonathan Kuminga. CJ McCollum could move, as we mentioned him before. Gabe Vincent, who also could move. So, your thoughts on the Atlanta Hawks bringing in Kingston and what they look like?
Yeah, well, I think the thing with Kingston, like, he comes from Houston, like really good, like NBA caliber athlete. I think the question with him is going to be like, is he enough of a threat, and can he score enough to get on the floor consistently at an NBA level? Because I mean, you can get on the floor like as a role player. If you can't score with, I mean, you've got to be, especially as a guard. And the league is so perimeter oriented. Now, I think they extended McCollum for a year, so that's a short-term move. I think whether they end up ultimately committing to him long-term, is going to depend on where they're at in this whole kind of retool process. I mean, they're a playoff team. Remember, they were up 2-1 on the Knicks, right? They're up 2-1 on the eventual champion. So, I think Fleming will give them a defensive presence. I think he's got to become a little better offensive player to be, um, to become like a cornerstone guy.
Yeah, and I would say, Atlanta again, keep in mind what they did at times against the New York Knicks, as you said. So not too far off, even if some of those names might not feel household to you. To round out the top 10, Merez Johnson Jr., forward coming from Michigan, picks number 9 overall. He goes to the Dallas Mavericks, who have Marvin Badgley, the third, Max Christie, as well as Cooper Flagg, the number 1 pick of 2025. And they also have Kyrie Irving on this roster, Derek Lively, the second, who I had an amazing conversation with him about his late father, who he has tattooed on his arm. And I will always remember my connection to Derek Lively out of Duke. And God bless you and your family, Derek. I hope you're doing well. Chris Middleton, who is another guy I covered, and I'm happy to see what he's doing. And then you look at Ryan Nemhard, who doesn't cost a lot of money. He's on the roster. Klay Thompson, PJ Washington. It looks like this Dallas team, at least on paper, and keep in mind, not only did they have this number 9 pick, but they also went and drafted Koa Pete before the end of the first round with their 30th overall pick here. So we did see that happen coming out of Arizona. They traded him to Phoenix via the New York Knicks. So Koa Pete is no longer on the team, but Dallas had 2 picks in this, and they ended up, Dallas got Sergio De La Rea, who was picked by the Lakers 25th overall, and they traded to Dallas via the New York Knicks. So look at how crazy this is. The champion Knicks are involved with the Mavericks and the Lakers in these 2 moves. The 25th overall pick, as we look at De La Rea out of Spain, he goes via the Knicks, traded to Dallas from the Lakers, who drafted him, for Koa Pete via the Knicks to go to Phoenix from Dallas, who drafted him. So we do see that Dallas gets 2 players in the first round. They get a player from Spain and Sergio De La Rea, and they also bring in the number 9 overall pick in Merez Johnson Jr. I feel good about Dallas's roster if healthy. Your thoughts on the Mavericks?
Yeah, I think the real interesting thing there is bringing in Dusty May as the head coach and to see how he makes that transition. And they took one of his Michigan guys. So, he had only been in the job a couple of days, so I don't know how much influence he had on that pick. But I'm sure that at the end of the day, he blessed it before they made it. Um, Flag is he's the cornerstone and he's the guy they're building around for the foreseeable future. So, putting parts around him, hopefully he stays healthy. And, he's a guy that I think people see as um, not necessarily generational player on the Wemby level, but perennial all-star caliber player down the line for them. So I think, that's probably part of the motivation of hiring a guy like May who I think is a creative guy and has shown that he can get the most out of rosters in a lot of different circumstances and really operated on kind of an NBA model at Michigan where they had high turnover transfers, international guys, older guys, that kind of thing. So, the history of college guys going to the NBA is not that, the results from that are not that great. I mean, Larry Brown went from college champion to NBA and succeeded, but he was a pro guy before he was a college guy. Um, so you haven't seen anybody make that move since, ironically, John Beilein, who went to the Cavs a few years back. But it'll be very interesting to see how he adapts to the NBA level. With a young roster, they clearly wanted to go with a younger coach who I think they feel like had more of a college mindset and might be a better candidate to develop younger players. So the one thing I like about May too is he's shown as a college coach, he's shown that he's adaptable. And what I mean by that is like they kind of bucked the trend at Michigan and played super big, but then he had a lot of success at Florida Atlantic playing largely small ball because you're not going to get the high end big college level bigs at a place like Florida Atlantic. So I think from a basketball X and O standpoint, he's a good hire. Whether he can make that adjustment to the NBA game, I think is a really key thing for them.
Yeah, and I think, we look at Dusty May, what he did at FAU to bring them success that they never had. You look at the regular season champion, conference tournament champion. They went to the NCAA tournament Final Four on the road there. FAU was achieving things before the Final Four that they had never done in their men's basketball history. And then after going to the Final Four, they make the NCAA tournament as they move from Conference USA to the American. And then you see in 2 seasons at Michigan, they're the conference tournament champion for the Big Ten. They get to the NCAA tournament in his first season at Michigan, and then they win a championship in his second season at Michigan. So you've seen within these last 4 years of him being a head coach, FAU makes history they never had. They go to the NCAA tournament the last 2 years he's there. Michigan goes to the NCAA tournament the 2 years that he's there, and they win a title here in the 2025-26 season. So yeah, there is the coach going from college to pro in the NBA that typically doesn't work. But I'll say this about Dusty May. He's had success everywhere he's gone, and he's doing it in short order. So the Dallas Mavericks are hoping that they strike gold with somebody who is maybe an exception to the rule of going from college to pro as a coach.
Yeah, I think is he going to be? I don't think there's any immediate expectations on on him. I don't think anybody's coming in and expecting him to contend right away. So I think he'll get a little bit of rope.
Yeah.
And you wonder if he's a guy that can get them all the way to where they want to get to. Like, people kind of tout Brad Stevens as being a success going college to the NBA. And that was true to a point. Like, Brad Stevens got the Celtics from terrible to solid. But then, to get over the top, Stevens moves to the front office, and then they go with Udoka, and then ultimately Missoula to get them, back to championship level. So it'll be interesting to see how, how the Mavericks evolve and how May evolves as a coach as they go from being really in a full rebuild to becoming relevant again, contendership wise.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big conversation of, what can Dallas do here and how is Dusty May going to lead? How are they all going to come together? At least on paper, he looks good, and so do they. Rounding out the top 10, it kind of brings us it doesn't kind of, it brings us full circle. We started talking about the Bucks trading Giannis, and we'll round out the NBA draft conversation of the top 10 with the Bucks drafting Braden Burries, guard out of Arizona, and that gives them their current roster here. And keep in mind that the Bucks had the opportunity to not only draft who they drafted, but we had a trade 13th because of this Miami Heat trade that they had for Giannis. Not only did they get to draft outright number 10 in the lottery, which is current the top 14 picks. I know it's going to expand after this draft, but the draft lottery for the NBA here in 2026 is the top 14 picks. So the Bucks draft 10, and then they also technically drafted 13 with Miami drafting Nate Ament out of Tennessee, a forward there for the Volunteers. And because of the trade for Giannis, this 13th pick was one of the 3 first-round picks that they got by giving up Giannis Antetokounmpo. And so they get 2 lottery picks here in Burries and Ament. So that puts them on the future roster that currently also has A.J. Green, Gary Harris. When the draft goes through, it will also have Tyler Hero, as we spoke about, Kasparis Yakuchonis, as well as Jaime Jaquez Jr. and Khalil Ware joining Miles Turner, Gary Trent Jr., and the likes of Torian Prince, as well as Kyle Kuzma. How do you feel about what the Bucks did, getting the draft in the lottery, and then thanks to the trade right before the draft for Giannis going to the Miami Heat, they gained Miami's pick as well, knowing that they got 2 lottery picks this time around?
Yeah, they're certainly in rebuild mode. And I think, it's good fortune on their part. I don't think either one of the guys they took, Burris or Amen, I don't think anybody expects either one of them to be like Burris is probably closer to being ready, and he's going to be the end of a good trivia question. As there were 10 college freshmen in his first 10 picks. I don't know when or if that. I don't think it's ever happened in the NBA draft before. They're not all legitimate or out of high school guys. A couple more pros, but Burris was a 10th out of 10 there. But but in terms of the Bucks, I think they can afford. Like Amen he's got some development to do. He's got to put on some strength, and I think Burris too. Like there's like it'd be. I think they're probably looking at him as playing off the ball. He's a shot maker, and we talked about them um, earlier on. Uh, how does he fit playing next to Tyler Hero? Um, I think if the Bucks end up moving Hero for more assets, I think Burrs is a guy who could get a lot of opportunity right away. I think if they hang on to Hero and make him one of their foundation pieces, then I think they're going to have to figure out how to integrate and incorporate Burries either behind Hero, alongside Hero. Can the two of them play together? Burrs isn't like a classical lead primary ball handler point guard, so I think that'll be one of the things that they need to figure out. But they're in rebuild mood, so I think they have time for those guys to kind of gain some footing and develop as NBA players.
Yeah, and I think I definitely, I mean, we'll see what Milwaukee is going to do here. And like you said, will they extend Tyler Hero and make sure that they take care of that for the foreseeable future? I think there's some good things on the roster. There's some good pieces, if healthy, for Milwaukee to hopefully at least get into the play-in part. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes now that they don't have Giannis, who has been the face of their franchise for so many years. Dave, we talked about the top 10. We know that up to 14 are the lottery picks. Is there anybody else before we hop out of here for the 2026 NBA Draft Round 1 that you want to discuss? I will throw to you some names that hit me, and if there's somebody else, then definitely discuss it. But I want to make sure that if there's anyone outside of the top 10, like a Yaxel Lendenborg, forward out of Michigan, who was drafted to Golden State, 11th overall, or, Abuka Akori, guard out of Stanford, drafted by the Thunder at 17th, traded to Detroit via Memphis, so he will be a Piston, as well as Alan Graves out of Santa Clara going to my Raptors at 19, that forward. You also look at Zuby Ejiofor going from St. John's to the Atlanta Hawks, who got to draft again. The Knicks, the champions, had Cameron Carr, guard out of Baylor, 24th pick, but traded to the Lakers, so the Knicks do not keep a pick in the first round, although they were involved with multiple picks happening. And right before the end of the first round, 29th out of 30 first round picks, forward out of Connecticut, Alex Caravan, who was drafted by the Cavs, will go to Sacramento to join a Kings team that we think could be good. And he is a two-time national champion with back-to-back championships led by Dan Hurley at Connecticut, with the UConn Huskies winning in 23 and 24. So those names or any other names in the first round that you think may have an immediate effect on a team?
Yeah, the one that really I think will be interesting to watch, that was Oklahoma City picking a Damar at 12. And I think that is a direct response to the Thunder not being able to handle Wemby in the playoffs and realizing that the Spurs are going to be an obstacle for them in the foreseeable future. And I think he's a rim protector guy, huge guy, like 7'3" ish. Um, I think he is a direct response to their concerns over Wemby, and I think the thing that also factors into that is concern over, or like, where does Chet Holmgren stand in the whole picture, and immediately Hartenstein.
Yeah.
Hartenstein, I believe, is a free agent this summer, and are they going to move on from Hartenstein? And I think they're committed to Holmgren in the near to medium term, but I think if Mara develops, I think it gives them a little flexibility. Can they play the two of them together, which would make them huge, or can they go out and I'm not suggesting that this will happen necessarily next year to two, but could they at some point look to flip Holmgren for some other needs if Mara develops into what they need him to be in contending with Wembanyama in the Western Conference? So, like, to me, that was the move outside of the top 10 that I thought was really interesting, and really is going to be fascinating to follow. Where does that lead the Thunder, over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, coming off a national championship with Michigan and Dusty May, Ade Mara, center out of Michigan, 7'3", known to have strengths of being unusually skilled and unusually tall. Good touch around the rim, an outstanding passer and quick processor who excels playing out of two-man actions. While not the most mobile defender, his size makes him a quality defensive deterrent around the basket, as you made mention of. So we look at Oklahoma City's roster that did not defeat San Antonio in the Western Conference Finals, and we got a 7'3" Ade Mara now. We also have Chet Holmgren at 7'1", Isaiah Hartenstein, as you said, at 7 feet, and Brendan Carlson at 7 feet, not necessarily going to be on the team. So, like you said, could Mara be that direct statement of saying he's got a little bit more on his body as far as weight-wise goes than Wembanyama, and if he can be unusually skilled and be a good passer and do different things, it doesn't necessarily have to be the best defender, but a deterrent like Wembanyama around the basket, being around 7'3", 7'4", is this Oklahoma City's way of saying, we were so close, and if Mara can do just a little bit for us, we can maybe make sure that San Antonio is not going back to the finals over us this upcoming season.
Yeah, for sure. It's like, that's why it's a direct response to their difficulties handling Wemby and handling the Spurs, I think, they're probably still the best team in the NBA overall. But the Spurs are like their kryptonite. They had a problem with them in the regular season, had a problem with them in the playoffs. And, that's largely due to Wemby, and the Spurs are going to continue to get better. So I think this is a move to try to neutralize the issues they have with Wemby, and the Thunder got to continue to get better to keep pace. Because like I said, the Spurs with their young core, they're not going anywhere, and neither is Oklahoma City. So I think this is going to be one of the really good rivalries and matchups in the league over the next few years. And this draft pick, like to me, it was obviously a move to counteract Wemby.
And just so everybody knows, Supergirl officially comes out here now. So wearing the S on my chest, which stands for hope, it was all too fitting. And I know a lot of these teams through the draft and through their trades having a lot of hope in these moves, giving them the future that they aspire to, or even better than what they're hoping for. With that being said, I want to thank Dave Pasiak for being a part of the show, as always, for DT and DP. And we covered a lot here around the NBA, not just the Giannis trade or round one of the 2026 NBA draft, but looking beyond this, looking at the second round and all of these other elements of the conversation that have now put us where we are, including the potential expansion to Seattle and Las Vegas. As always, Mr. Pasiak, thank you for your time inside of the Great Lakes Honda City Studios here on Wake Up Call.
Yeah, great to talk to you, Dan. And remember why people are fascinated by drafts, because nothing sells like hope.
That is absolutely true. And I think Supergirl's hoping the same thing, right? Nothing sells like hope. And that is what this S means. We'll talk with you all soon. Stay safe, stay well. And as we always say, inside the Great Lakes Honda City Studios on Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora, God bless, no stress. Do your best.